29,000 people who had COVID convictions, effectively, during the pandemic for things like having some friends round in the garden and the police coming, or taking more than one walk a day. I mean, when you say these things now, you do realise it's the stuff of insanity.
It was a strange time, wasn't it?
And Robert Buckland is now saying that he thinks they should have their slates wiped clean.
Yeah, I think this is really good from Robert Buckland. It's a recognition that this was a unique time. There were unique laws put in place, and it was also really difficult to challenge these fixed penalty notices. I remember getting a call from a solicitor right at the start of the pandemic saying, "Look, I've had a few people, got a few clients, and they've got these fixed penalty notices. They say they were, unfair or unlawfully imposed. What do you think we should do?" And I actually said, "Look, you're better off paying the fine. If you try and fight this in court, even if I were to act for you pro bono, you're going to spend more on court fees than it would cost you in the fine." So
the principle, though, Sam.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But the problem is, if you lose on that principle, then you've got a criminal record for a long time, and that's these 29,000 people.
Can I be clear here? Are they Is it a criminal conviction, or is a fixed penalty notice doesn't give you a criminal conviction?
Yeah, and that's a really good distinction. So these 29, these I think were the criminal convictions.
Right.
So
As
these are the
to
people
ones
that
Boris
have,
and Sunak got, for instance.
So if you just get a fixed penalty notice, in the same way as you get fixed penalty notice for parking in the wrong place, for example, you pay it straight away. That's not a criminal conviction. It's not going on your record. If you challenge it and you go to court, then you might get a criminal record. So that's what Robert's talking about here, these wiping the criminal records off. One caveat to my endorsement of this: these are not all for the same thing. So some of these convictions, yes, are for going out more than once, having a few friends around. Some of them are for organising a rave with 1,000 people. So I think what I would really be encouraging is maybe something a little bit more subtle than just a complete wiping the slate clean for everyone. Maybe something that just acknowledges the different levels of offence that were committed here.
And what were the most severe with the most severe penalties? Can you remember, Sam?
I remember some people, certainly up to £10,000, I think.
They were a lot of money.
But
they won't get the money back. But Sir Robert Buckland's view is that the conviction should be wiped. It's off their record.
Yeah, and that's what he's targeting. So, and actually, I think recently about 40% haven't been paid anyway. But you're not talking about the money. You're just talking about the record that goes along with you, and that can impact on things like future job prospects. It's something you have to declare if you're going to the US and Canada. You might be denied entry, and so this is it goes beyond just paying a fine, which could be as low as £60 or as high as £10,000.
Just looking at some of the numbers here, the fines that were issued were worth £26 million in this country. People in their 30s accounted for the largest amount of fines paid at £6.9 million. Those aged 20 or below paid out £3.3 million. And almost half of the fines, £12.4 million, were raised by just 5 police forces: Greater Manchester, Merseyside, Lancashire, South Wales and the Met. There's definitely the Northerners were slightly more rebellious during that period of time. Good for them, I say.
Yeah, and my generation, people in their mid-30s. Hasten to say, not me. Was not given anything.
Yeah, who was statistically at very, very, very vanishingly small risk of being harmed by the infection.
Yeah,
by
absolutely.
The virus.
Although for me, I'm a little bit disappointed in my generation there, because I think one of the things I was kind of really proud of with my generation is that we kind of dug in and looked after the people older and more vulnerable than us by making the sacrifice during lockdown. So I'm sad to see we're also the worst offenders, because that sort of takes away from that, I think.
Gives me faith, Sam, that the next generation might be able to stand up to the overreaching state.
But ironic, Buckland, of course, would have had a big say in the levies and the fines, because he was the Justice Secretary at the time.
Yeah.
So he's almost trying to wipe the slate clean of his own work, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and that's... But, again, I've been very praiseful of Robert today, but I'm going to praise him again. I think it's good to see politicians doing that and acknowledging that, look, this was an exceptional time. This is... God, I hope it's not something we'd do in the everyday business of politics.
Makes me think if the time happened again, he would say he might take a different view.
Potentially so, but even if he wouldn't, I think this is right because it's saying that we've moved on now. You don't need the deterrent effect of a criminal record to stop people breaking lockdown in 2024, do you? It's entirely irrelevant. There's no real public benefit from maintaining this ongoing punishment of people. So, and with the exception of some of the really extreme ones, and I think it's right that politicians recognise that, and we just move on now.
I broke the rules frequently.
Good.
And I won't name who I did it with, but we just used to have a gin and tonic together.
Yeah.
Go for a walk, us apart, but then we'd think, one gin won't hurt.
And that's the point, is one gin wouldn't have hurt. And that's why the lessons, I still don't think we've learnt the lessons from this period of time, of course. This goes a small way, I suppose, to righting the wrongs of that period of time. But I'd like them to go further. Do you know what? I'd like Sunak and Starmer also to just tackle this issue when they're electioneering. They're getting away with it. And that's where this anger from the public, regardless of where you stood during this period of time, the anger from the public about this issue is enormous, and it's now everyone's going, don't talk about that, let's just all move on. And there is some truth to that, but it feels like it's in the campaign.
And if you remember too, Labour really went for Sunak when he got his fixed penalty notice, and he was frankly in the room for about 1 minute. I didn't think he should have got the penalties in the first place, but they made political capital out of it. And when you look back in hindsight, should they have really?
I agreed with that, actually, because I think in this time when we're all in this together, what we needed from our leaders was leadership, was setting an example, and was to be, better than the average person in terms of those rules. And I think it was a real disappointment and a real betrayal. Even if it was a minor breach, we needed them saying, look, we have asked you to make enormous sacrifices, and we are going to be the epitome of that. And it sort of embodies this problem that everyone, left, right, centre, has with politicians of one rule for you, one rule for us.
He came close to resigning over it, Sunak. If you remember, hours, he disappeared below the radar, and I suspect when he looks back now, he probably thinks, I should have quit as Chancellor. Whole of history could have been written differently.
Well, I think he'd be having an easier time in this campaign, actually,
he would.
If he wasn't tagged with the errors he made as Chancellor.
Well, everybody, let's face it, was somehow benefiting from that period of time. Sunak thought he was, because he'd be the good guy with the picture of winning the burgers, eat out to help out, handing out the furlough money. The Conservative Party thought people will love him forever because of his generosity. Well, people are smarter than that. And we worked out the fact that our financial situation now is in a mess, our inflation, our debt, £500 billion we spent for the public purse at that period of time. And people are cleverer than that. We knew it was a mistake.
And the endemic fraud in the furlough scheme, which the money's never been brought back. Was it £11 billion, rings a bell? The Treasury Minister resigned at the dispatch box in the House of Lords.
It was about that.
Yeah, that was an astonishing
moment. They had to write off.
Yeah, I think I can't remember his name, the Treasury Minister. Was it Lord Sassoon? I can't remember.
I don't know.
But to resign at the dispatch box, he was so appalled by the failure to get the money back.
Yeah.
And it was a real, I think, we haven't gotten over it was in a way an astonishing achievement to be that bad at responding to the pandemic. And I think there was a point where we had both the biggest economic downturn and the highest death toll in the sort of advanced economic world. And there's a weird sort of achievement in being that bad at both ends. Other countries hadn't had such a big economic impact but had a higher death toll. Other countries did the other way around. Like, how did we mess up on both of those fronts at the same time?
Lord Agnew it was.
Listening to the wrong people, I would say, was a big part of it. Listening to the wrong people, not having strong enough leadership to take tough decisions, and bowing down, I guess, to a press as well that were all talking from one voice. It was a failure of all of our major influences? Partly.
I think lack of leadership it was so key there as well. And I think we saw in lockdown the sort of the populist faction really being found out, in that they promised the world just a year earlier, not even a year earlier, in that 2019 election. And suddenly, they weren't campaigning on their home turf anymore. They were dealing with a very real problem. And they didn't take a decision. This is the really astonishing thing for me, is still going right back to the start of lockdown, where we had that 4-week period where we dithered and delayed and no one took a decision. I mean, certainly the scientific evidence that I've read indicates that if we'd gone earlier in lockdown, not only would about 20,000 fewer people died, but lockdown would have been much shorter and we could have been out after a couple of months. And instead, we had a higher death rate. Plus, we were locked down for such a long time.
You're not convinced, Beverly Turner.
You know what, Sam? I have a lot of information, detail that we'd never have time to get across on that, but that's not really true. But Sam, always great to see you. Thank you so much.